The SEC has a process using its Rule 12b-25 and Form 12b-25 to enable you to get an extension for your Form 10Q or Form 10K and still be considered timely even though those weren't filed on time. Today on Zippy Point. I'm Brock Romanek and I'm a big fan of use. Some rules you just love for no reason at all. Rule 12b-25 is one of those for me. Maybe it's because I crack up every time I see a 12b-25 filed on the SEC's Edgar database. It doesn't show up as a Form 12b-25. It shows up as an NT filing in a company's filing stream. NT standing for not timely. So here's what that feed looks like when it's on the SEC site. It just says NT and then the name of the form that's actually late. So the NT comes before the form type, Form 10K, Form 10Q, Form 11K. You can't get a filing extension using 12b-25 or any other rule for Form 8Ks, by the way. Rule 12b-25 just isn't available for 8Ks. And as noted in this CorpFin staff interpretation, 12b-25 also can't be used to extend the 120-day deadline to get a proxy on file with the SEC so that you can incorporate by reference that proxy into Part 3 of the Form 10K. So here are 5 things you should know about Rule 12b-25. Number 1, it's an extension. So Form 12b-25 itself is called notification of a late filing, but you can think of it as an extension. So as you can see here, the form's pretty simple. The first thing you do is you're going to check one of these boxes to indicate what form this 12b-25 relates to. Then you move on and fill in your company information. And then in Part 2, you're filling out 3 check boxes. The first one is regarding whether you had unreasonable effort or expense in order to get the 10Q or 10K filed on time. You're not going to check that box if that's not accurate. You can describe the reasons in Part 3. The next box here is about whether you think you're going to be able to file the Form 10Q and 10K on time, even with the extension. And the third box to check here in Part 2 is whether there's a third-party exhibit. We'll talk about that in a minute. Part 3 here is about the narrative. These are the reasons why you're filing this 12b-25. And then Part 4 is you're actually going to give a phone number, name and a phone number for someone from the SEC staff to call if they need to. And then that's the first item. The second item is whether you've been filing your reports, your current for your periodic reports over the last 12 months. And third thing here is whether you anticipate that you're going to have any change in your earnings based on revising your results from the past year. Then you're going to have the duly authorized officer sign this thing and file. 2, you'll be timely if you can get the final filing done by the extension date. So this is how it works. You realize that your 10K or 10Q can't be filed by their due dates. So you scramble to file a Form 12b-25 with the SEC within 1 business day of the due date of that 10K or 10Q. This is all according to 12b-25a. If you do that, you get the Form 12b-25 filed within a day, meaning you get 1 extra day after the 10K or 10Q's due date to get that Form 12b-25 in. Then that 10K or 10Q will be deemed to have been filed on the original due date if the company timely files that Form 12b-25, presto magic, under Rule 12b-25b. So you have this extra day to file the 12b-25, and if there's a weekend or a holiday in there, so you're filing on a Friday basically, and so you can't file with Edgar on the weekend or on a holiday, so you're going to file that on the following Monday. That's according to this CorpFin staff interpretation, which is just following what Exchange Act Rule 0.3 follows. So with a timely 12b-25 filing, you get an extension of 15 calendar days for a 10K and 5 calendar days for a 10Q. These 15 days and 5 days extensions are counted from the due date of the original form, not that extra date that not when your 12b-25 filing was made itself, not that extra date. You go back to the original due date of the original filing according to this CorpFin staff interpretation. Of course, if you then blow these deadlines, these new extended deadlines, you fail to file your missing report within the extended time period, you're considered late. The SEC will consider the company to be delinquent as of the original due date. You'll be considered an untimely filer, and this will hurt you for 12 months and for purposes of your Form S3 eligibility, as noted in this CorpFin staff interpretation. One last note here, and an oddity. A Form 12b-25 must be filed even in situations where your 10K or 10Q is filed within 1 business day of their due date, meaning that both the Form 12b-25 and that periodic report are being filed on the same day. You still need to make that 12b-25 filing so that the periodic reports is deemed filed. There's a retroactiveness to it, so it's deemed filed as of its due date. 3, don't choose reasons for your extension filing lightly. So the process for this is sort of like filing for an extension to file your tax returns, except when you file your tax returns, the market's not going to punish you for filing for an extension. Here, investors are going to scrutinize why you're filing this Form 12b-25. What are your reasons? You're going to have to be really careful about the reasons you pick, because your stock price really might get hammered, and perhaps for good reason, because you might not have a good excuse. Now, you might have a good excuse why you're being late. Your auditor was late with the consent for some reason, or maybe your filing agent, there was a strike or something. I don't know. I mean, it would be pretty rare to have one of these kind of good administrative reasons. Usually it's a bad reason. So under 12b-25c, if part of the rationale for you needing to file this extension involves the inability of a third party, such as your auditor or the filing agent, like I mentioned, you need to include a statement from them explaining why you're unable to meet the filing deadline based on something related to them. So don't use 12b-25 as a check the box type of exercise. The reasons that you disclose for not filing in time should not be formulaic. It's not a cut and paste disclosure document. The SEC occasionally does bring enforcement actions based on disclosure that is not up to snuff. So here's an example that talks about the company doing a merger and then the complexity of accounting for the purchase price allocation of a multi-billion-dollar business combination. And then here's another example that I'm not really wild about. It's saying that its reason for unreasonable effort and expense is that it's still compiling information for the 10Q and the auditors have not completed their review of the financials. That seems a little bit too generic for me. So the upshot is missing a filing deadline is a big deal. So senior management and your investor relations departments are likely to face questions about it. And it's worth reminding them that responding to these questions, that they have an FD obligation, that they shouldn't be selectively disclosing any material non-public information, because if there's something going on with their financials, they're likely going to know things that are non-public and material. 4, you have to file for an extension even if you know you're going to not make the extension deadline. So a fair question to ask is, why bother with filing a Form B-25 if you know you can't file that 10Q within another 5 calendar days or the 10K within another 15 calendar days, and you bother to do it because it's still required under Rule 12b-25. It's not an optional filing. If you're going to be late, really late even, you still have to file it. The SEC wants you to let the market know that you're going to be late. And so it's a bummer to make this filing because you still have to provide a reason for your inability to timely file in the narrative part of the form. So you're providing a narrative, and it ain't going to usually be pretty. So if you think you're in this camp where you're not going to be able to meet the 12b-25 deadlines for getting, and you're not going to be getting that retroactive timely filed status, you're not going to check that second box in Part 2 of Form B-25, and this CorpFin staff interpretation highlights that. The good news is that if in fact you're suddenly able to file the 10Q or 10K within the extended period, you're still going to be considered timely even if you didn't check that box in Part 2 of Form 12b-25, as noted in this CorpFin staff interpretation. 5, you don't get a second bite at the apple. So you can only file one Form B-25 for any particular 10Q or 10K. You can't get filed for a second extension, and that's highlighted by this CorpFin staff interpretation. By the way, companies typically don't bother filing an amended 12b-25 if they had checked that box thinking they would make the extended deadline, but then they don't. In other words, typically you're not going to amend your 12b-25 filing just to uncheck that box in Part 2. Rule 12b-25d provides that the company may not use any 33 Act registration statements that's predicated on timely filing. In other words, you can't use a Form S-3 until your delinquent report is actually filed. So I have a separate Vid-Guide about Form 8Ks filed under Item 3.01. If you get notice from your stock exchange that you're not meeting your continued listing standards, a failure to file a periodic report typically will result and you getting such a notice from your exchange. Then I have another vid guide about item 402 8Ks if companies need to warn investors that they shouldn't rely on previously issued financials. So let me know what you think.